Well, I'm James T. Laney. I was born in Wilson, Arkansas, a hamlet on the Mississippi River, downstream from Hannibal, Missouri, where Mark Twain grew up. And I had my early childhood there, and then moved to Memphis, Tennessee, where I graduated from a high school that was a college preparatory school that enabled me to win a scholarship to Yale University in 1945, which was otherwise unthinkable for me to go east and to a school like that. I graduated from Yale with a 2-year stint in the Army, where I was in counterintelligence, a special agent in Korea for a couple of years, which was really pivotal in my life because Korea kept reappearing, and it eventually changed my vocational direction. I had graduated from college in economics and had planned to be an investment banker, but the Korea experience weighed on me, and by that time I'd gotten married to my high school sweetheart. And so I decided to go to divinity school there, and it was at Yale that I went to divinity school. I graduated from divinity school, and I was also, while I was in divinity school, chaplain at the Choate School, which was at that time a very, very fine, well-regarded boys' preparatory school, the alma mater of John Kennedy, I might say. I was not teaching when he was there. And after a stint in the pastorate, Berta and I went to Korea as missionaries, where I worked with college students, and we lived on the campus of the premier private university in Korea called Yonsei University. And I was asked if I would teach there, so I did. And that whetted my appetite for academic work as well as for the church. And so I went back to Yale, and a couple of years later finished my PhD. And after a bit of teaching at Vanderbilt in their divinity school, I was invited to come to Emory as dean of the Candler School of Theology. I was here for 8 years, and in that time I got to know many of the people who were leading the university, Paula Turman and Henry Bowden, and of course Jimmy Williams and Jimmy Sibley, who would later figure prominently in my own time as president at Emory. After 8 years, Emory was looking for a successor to Sanford Atwood, and I was asked if I would take it, and I was happy to do so. I was happy for many reasons, one of which was the burgeoning of Atlanta itself. It was certainly the capital of the South, and I was so taken by its spirit and its urban power. It was obviously going to be a powerhouse as an urban center, and the vitality and verve that was evident everywhere in Atlanta. And I felt that that was also showing itself at Emory. And Emory, I felt, along with Atlanta, had a great future. I mean, not only was an excellent school, but it had a future of true greatness in it. And so I took the job as president with the thought that Emory could begin to realize its potential. That vision, that dream, was shared with Robert Woodruff, and he bought it and helped propel us into that sort of orbit of higher excellence with this phenomenal gift of the corpus of the Emily and Ernest Woodruff Fund. And of course, all that time I was aware and the beneficiary of the Emory Clinic. I didn't have any health problems then, but since then I have been grateful for the marvelous health care that I've received at Emory Clinic in so many ways. First, through Dr. Seavey, who's name is emblazoned on this area here. Then Dr. David Roberts, who continues that tradition as an internist, and Dr. Guyton, who replaced a heart valve, and many others. Yeah, and our family as well. I can extol the qualities of the clinic forever. It's a marvelous center of practice and applied medicine in the best sense. When I became president in 1977, Garland Herndon was the vice president for health affairs and the head of the Woodruff Health Sciences Center. And Garland was, of course, very close to Mr. Woodruff. He was his confidant and physician. And I learned a lot about the early days of the clinic from Garland. We went down to Edgeway with Mr. Woodruff a good deal. We're there on his birthday every year. And it was amazing to hear how Mr. Woodruff had been concerned about the financial health of the medical school and how he had picked up the deficit of the medical school in the 40s, just picked it up, I guess really out of the income of the Emily and Ernest Woodruff Fund, but I think he felt there must be a better way than this, and somehow he and others got the idea of starting the clinic in about 1953, and they persuaded, or somebody persuaded, I think Mr. Woodruff was one among them, Elliot Scarborough from New York to come down and help begin the clinic. And this, of course, as they say, the rest is history. When I became president, the clinic was booming. The heart operations were so good. I mean, in so many ways. Of course, Bruce Logue in cardiology had begun that way back in the early 50s. And then Charlie Hatcher came along and brought surgical skill and excellence to the business of bypass surgery and valve replacement and so forth, and many others that I could name. Garland and I dreamed many dreams about how the medical center could flourish even more. One of the things that I felt when I took over as president was that we really had, pardon me, several centers of medical endeavor. We had the Emory Hospital, which itself had been a transplant from the old Wesley Hospital downtown. We had the medical school itself, which is a transplant from the Medical College of Atlanta. We had Grady Hospital, which was one of the foremost residency training programs in the country. We had Crawford Long, which was down at Midtown and was in many ways only quasi-integrated into the university. It was, and I say this with affection, it was the fiefdom of Wadley Glenn, the doctor there. And we had, and then of course the clinic. The clinic was in many ways, certainly financially, the strongest of those things. But I felt that until we had a true synthesis of all of this and made not only the residency programs and the clinical program and the academic programs in the medical school, they should be matched by an equivalent excellence in research. That as good as we were, and we were very good, we would not be in the league of the Hopkins and the Washington universities and the Harvards and the Yales and so forth until we had research of first quality. And so that was really my constant vision. How can we put these parts together, integrate Crawford Long into the system more, and bring the clinic, which had become very successful, but in a way was not integrated real closely with the medical school, although the members were all faculty. And the Grady program, which was in a sense run by a different group of doctors on salary for the most part. I think they did practice some at the clinic. We needed to have some way of putting that together in a way that didn't diminish the quality of any of them, you know, as you tried to bring it into some sense of equilibrium, if not parity. And Arthur Richardson, who was the dean when I took over as president, and had been dean for a long time, and I think had grown tired of the situation, retired. And so it was up to us to get a new dean. And at that time, we sought a dean who I wanted, who would share the vision that we had for the school as a whole. And we brought in, after deliberation, Jim Glenn, who was a urologic surgeon. He was head of the department at Duke, and later was brought into membership in the Royal Academy of Surgeons in England. A very, very able fellow, but sort of a shoot from the hip guy. And he came in, and I think he was more impatient than change could accommodate. And he left after 3 years. What we needed was somebody that could command the respect of the clinic and help persuade them, the clinic partners, who by this time were financially extraordinarily successful, that the integration into the medical school was not to their disadvantage, and unless it was handled well, would be to their disadvantage. I understand that. They certainly didn't want to hand over something that was really just at the top of the game to something that only could possibly make some progress. That's understandable. And it was only after Charlie Hatcher became the vice president for health affairs and the head of the Woodruff Health Sciences Center that we began to make some progress, because Charlie had the confidence of the clinic. He had been the head of the clinic, and he, I think on the whole, shared my vision, but he certainly wanted to take it in measured steps. So we got another dean, who was Richard Krause. Richard Krause was head of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, which is a very prestigious thing in Washington, or Bethesda, and was a noted scientist, medical scientist. And I would say that Richard had a real vision of what a medical school should be, but he lacked the requisite skills to develop the confidence that could bring this off. In the meantime, and I'm just running on, in the meantime, it became clear to me that we had to have some greater support from the clinic than had been true up to that point. It was, up until then, basically just paying rent for the clinic buildings, which were owned by the university. And that was a fixed amount that might go up, you know, marginally each year according to the cost of living index. But I thought that a more equitable adjustment would be for there to be a percentage of the clinic income. Well, that was presented as being very difficult to obtain. Part of the argument was, well, the clinic is a partnership and so forth. But we, primarily backed by Jimmy Sibley, who was a very redoubtable lawyer and member of the trustees, had been the personal lawyer and counselor to Mr. Woodruff and so forth, who carried huge prestige and professional competence and unbelievable acute discernment and judgment. And Jimmy and I worked together, and we agreed that the clinic should pay a certain percentage of its annual income before distribution to the partners. And this would be used not as a slush fund, but as a basis for greater research in the medical school, strengthen the medical school, which was in some ways had not kept up with the reputation of the clinic itself. And so we decided to present this to the clinic partners. And I elected to do this by myself. And we met one evening, and it was a fraught occasion, to put it in a euphemistic term. It was a good occasion. I presented it and the reasons why and so forth. And interestingly, though, there were only two or three people that really stood up and were highly critical. One of them was Dr. Susie Tyndall, who was a neurosurgeon. And I think she thought she was going to eviscerate me like, like she did. And she said, well, you know, this is, what authority do you have to come in and tell us to do this sort of thing? I said, well, you're all faculty of the university. And it happens that I'm the president of the university. And I think this is the way to go. And I have the backing of the trustees on this. And this is the way we're going to go. And that was the end of it. And so we instituted and that worked out fine. Once it was understood, it really, you know, it certainly didn't hobble the clinic. And it meant that the clinic had a greater stake in what happened across Clifton Road, not just the hospital, but the medical school. And, you know, that began the integration, which of course now it's an old story. The dean of the medical school chairs the board of the clinic, which is, to me, the ideal situation. You know, there's a complete symbiosis or symbiosis there. And all of that is brought in together. And Crawford Long is now fully integrated into the Emory healthcare system as Emory Midtown. And it's just marvelous to see Grady has flourished, and the medical school itself is now, we were way down in the the late 30s in rankings of medical schools in 1975. And I guess now we're certainly in the top 20, the medical school. And that's a very hard, as someone once asked me, he said, so you plan to make Emory in the top dozen institutions, who do you plan to replace? Do you think they're going to just move over? I mean, this is hard to move up. And Emory Medical School has now achieved a reputation that's just extraordinary. And one which, in looking back on it over 30 years and more, you just take great pride, not of accomplishment, but just seeing it happen. I think there was no question, but what part of this, I felt, you know, it wasn't just the clinic and the medical school and Grady and Crawford Long. It was also that the university, having, in a sense, been an amalgamation of already existing institutions. Emory at Oxford came here as the college. They established the theology school. They established a law school. They moved the medical school in, then the hospital in, and of course the nursing came out of the same program, the hospital, and then we adopted a dental school just after World War II, and all of that. And there was, and then a business school. There was a lacked synergy. The university, I'm just talking about the medical school. And it was terribly important to bring the hulk, the basis of the university into a center where it really was, not just a group of affiliates, but was one university. And the gift from Mr. Woodruff, and this is the vision that he shared with me, was, and that's why that gift came to the university without restriction, came to the university, not to the medical center or not to anything else, but to the university, to deploy resources across the university and give the heft to the center. And I think that's been true, and I rejoice in it. But all of this bears upon the clinic because, in a way, I think you could say that the clinic led the way in both national recognition and in quality for Emory medicine. It just led the way. It was the practitioners, the surgeons and the internists and the cardiologists and all the other specialties were so good. And we needed to balance that with research so that we were not a derivative school. You know, it was not enough to take the practices and the new pharmaceuticals that have been tested elsewhere and apply them here at the highest level. We wanted to develop things here and be with others in that cutting edge. And that's why I think that the integration of the clinic into all of this has brought its strength and reputation into the whole medicine. It's suffused the whole with a quality that it enjoyed largely, not exclusively, alone. Yeah, I knew all of them. I knew Willis and Bruce the best. Well, it's interesting that I really got to know Willis Hurst on the dance floor at the Capitol City Club. He would go there on Saturday night where they had a little orchestra in the Mirador room, and he and his wife would just turn a rug. I mean, he was so nimble, and I was so impressed, and I would go down there, and we got to be friends outside of professional there. I enjoyed that very much, and of course, we had other relationships as well. Willis Hurst, I got to know. We just had a simpatico, and I was impressed the fact that he had been LBJ's personal physician and cardiologist. I knew Dr. Hughley less, and the surgeon you mentioned, Sam Wilkins, yeah. He hunted down at Itchaway a lot, and I got to know him there. At that time, I didn't need surgery, so I didn't get to know him from the patient professional end, but we got to be friends. But as I say, I was very close to Garland Herndon, and Garland spent a lot of time down at Itchaway, the Mr. Woodruff plantation, and I was with him there, and Mr. Woodruff and I shared many times. I felt like he was a major stakeholder, which he certainly was, and he was due regular reports on things, which he seemed to enjoy. I must say, now I've told this story, but because it's true, he had a little card and which he had printed out, and this is, of course, a long time ago, so it says sexist language, but it said, "There's no limit to how far a man can go or how much he can accomplish if he doesn't care who gets the credit." And I was there one afternoon, and we were chatting, and contrary to many reports, Mr. Woodruff had an ineffable smile. People don't think of him. I thought, this is why he was such an extraordinarily successful salesman when he was young. His smile was just so winsome. It was captivating. There was a charisma there. He was not loquacious, but he had that physical charisma. But anyway, he said, reached in his inner coat pocket and pulled out this card. Smiled at me that smile. I said, uh-oh. Dr. Laney, have I shared this with you? And I looked at it and I read it. And I handed it back. He said, no, you keep it. Okay, I'll keep it. Well, that happened 2 or 3 more times. And I don't think it was because he forgot that he had given it to me. I think he was letting me know that this is the way, if you really want to make an organization go, this is the way it's got to go. And there are a lot of prima donnas, not just in medicine, but all over the university. But this is the way you got to go. And one of the things that I always enjoyed was letting the prima donnas have their lead. You know, let them go, unless they begin to cross paths and fight or something like that. Then I had to step in. But I thought it was wonderful to have all these great thoroughbred people running the show and doing things, and they did. It was a matter of just sort of, you know, knowing the route and then turning it loose. Yeah. Logue.
It was Logue.
Bruce Logue. I never saw Willis Hurst dance. I never did. He talked, but he didn't dance. Of course, he was so hard of hearing at the end, it was hard to communicate with him. But Willis, Bruce Logue was such a energetic fellow. He had he was almost like a coiled spring. But when he got on the dance floor, it all came loose, and it was wonderful to see. And he was an inspiration to our children, whom we would often take down there with us. I was trying to encourage them to dance, and enjoy it, not feel it was a chore, which some of the younger generation thought at that time. I first heard of Emory in 1950 when I was about to graduate from Yale and was thinking of going to divinity school. And my and being a Methodist, the bishop in Tennessee suggested that I look at Emory or Duke, with both Methodist seminaries. But I was already at Yale, and Yale enjoyed a very enviable reputation, so I saw no reason to come south at that point. And I was known, I didn't have to move and all that. So that was the first time I heard of Emory. Then when I came to Vanderbilt, which my grandfather graduated from in the 1890s, and was a university well known to us, the family, I began to hear a lot more about Emory and of course Atlanta, but I still didn't know even about Atlanta. And it was only when I was invited to come down to Atlanta for an interview for the deanship at Candler School of Theology that I flew into the Atlanta airport and was just overcome by the traffic at the airport. It made Nashville look like a cow town. Planes were coming and going on. Well, of course, now that would be laughable. This was in 1969, but it was already a busy airport then. And then I saw Atlanta, and I thought, man, this is a city. And being a Southerner, I was proud to see a city that caught my imagination. And I came out to Emory and talked to people. I thought, this is really a wonderful institution. Great people. Now, at that point, of course, I didn't meet members of the clinic or the medical faculty or any other faculty for that matter. I met the president and vice president Jake Ward, the dean of faculties, and other people. But I was really quite taken with the faculty of the School of Theology. Several of them had their advanced degrees from Germany. And I realized that this was again, a faculty that was ready to take off. These were young people. They were young or younger than I at that time, and then I was pretty young, about 40 or so. And so that was how I became aware of Emory. And I was, to use the old term. I was smitten by it. And I was convinced that Emory, the School of Theology, could become a great seminary. And we made it a great seminary. We bought the Hartford Library, and that catapulted us from nowhere to third in the North America in size of theological libraries. And it moved the university up about 5 notches in the entire holdings of the university library, ahead of Vanderbilt. I thought, now we're getting somewhere. I was very competitive. I wanted to beat Vanderbilt, and I wanted to catch up with Duke. That was my immediate goal. And I think that's true, that the theology faculty and the Department of Religion faculty in the graduate school have become among the top 4 or 5 in the country. In fact, even when I was dean, the ranking put us alongside Princeton in the top 6. And I thought, you know, now that's how Emory ought to be moving. So when I became president, I thought, well, we'll try to repeat this on a larger scale. And, you know, in a way, I had that vision. And my ideal of a university was the one I was most familiar with, was Yale. And I unapologetically just cribbed a lot of stuff from Yale, you know, that I thought were best practices. After all, they'd had several hundred years to hone those best practices. And I also had a lot of friends there, so that we were able to get some friends. And I'd also, when I was dean, I'd taught at Harvard for a semester and met a lot of the people, not only the governing board and the president, but also a lot of the faculty across the university. So it was no time at all when I became president that we brought down Hal Berman from the law school, Carl Deutsch from the School of from the political science department, both towering figures in their fields, and and others. So that's the general picture there. Well, I think it's, you know, just become more mature. It's become integrated into the whole medical complex more. It has brought in marvelous people. I mean, I'll never forget Andreas Grunzig coming here from Switzerland. Charlie Hatcher had him come over to the Lowwater one afternoon for my first meeting with him, and he drove up on a motorcycle. My gosh, what if he skinned his hands or something? You know, this is rather tricky. But he was a kind of a daredevil. He was an adventurer and a marvelous pioneer, and we were blessed to have him for a few years. I remember attending one of his sessions where he would bring in cardiologists from around the country and teach them through closed circuit television. Watch the threading of the catheter through the arteries and how he would close them on. The balloon would inflate, and it was a marvelous thing. And you know, it was fascinating to be around that. I mean, we knew we were seeing great things happen, and I just wanted those great things to happen elsewhere, not at their expense, but I mean elsewhere. And that's, I think, in many ways, the clinic. I have to be careful, but I think the clinic was the first unit of the university to really shine nationally. You know, I mean, we had a lot of graduates from the college that went on to great careers. We have 3 historians from the 30s that graduated from the college that all won Pulitzer Prizes in history. Van Woodward was one, and the great biographer of Thomas Jefferson, Duma Malone, and anyway, but apart from that, it was the sheer brilliance and quality of the of the practice in the clinic, and the fact, and I think Charlie Hatcher was the one that saw this possibility to bring in people who just simply were at the top of their game, or were obviously on their way to being at the top of the game. And then the question that I had to resolve, well, how do we get the rest of them at the top of their game, the ones outside the clinic? And that was, I felt, my role. And I loved the role. I had such fun. Not always smooth, but I had fun. I'm just not equipped to, I mean, keep doing what it's doing and moving along with all of the components. They're now in sync. There's a real synchrony here. And I think that I'm just so pleased. I know Dr. Doug Morris is my cardiologist, and of course he's the head of the clinic, and we talk about the clinic all the time. In fact, I've lectured for the last 3 or 4 years in his leadership program, and I'm very pleased with the fact that they're developing a sense of professional and university citizenship as well as professional expertise. I mean, the broader aspects of what it's like to be a part of this great institution, this team, and what it takes beyond the immediate expertise that one has, beyond that. Oh, Lord, marrying my wife. And that's not a throwaway. And these days I see it as very much being the most important thing. And raising the family that she and I raised together. She largely tagged along with 5 children and 16 grandchildren in 66 years. So I don't know, I would, I think my feeling about the university is that we had our time, and I think we acquitted ourselves well, and the infusion of resources that the Woodruff gift provided in 1979 was truly transformative for the university. It not only gave us resources and means, but it gave us a new confidence and a new level of vision. We thought, now we really can do something. And that vote of confidence was invaluable. I mean, all of a sudden, Emory became talked about in higher education circles, that things are happening at Emory. And that's really good. Whether they happened or not, they were thinking they were. And we used that, at least initially, by the time I was president, as an in-house foundation. We did not just fold it into the budget, the income and all, but used it to make initiatives for excellence. That was, that gave us jolts here, and they were throughout the university. And I take pride in that. We just had truly a wonderful team. The fact that we had some resources and back in the 80s and early 90s. But what the university is today is so much beyond that, exponentially beyond that, in so many ways. Not just the expansion of the campus, but the quality of the programs and the distinction of the faculty, the numbers the large number of Emory faculty that are members of national academies and things like that. And I think, look back on it, and I think the great transformative moment was when George and Robert Woodruff voted confidence in Emory and transferred the totality of the Emily and Ernest Woodruff Fund which was 3 million shares of Coca-Cola to the university, unrestricted, to give a jolt to the university to really move it forward. Those 3 million shares of Coke stock, as Coke stock, are now worth $2.5 billion. So you can appreciate the magnitude of that gift. Nothing like that's been given, even today, if you see it like that. In other words, that's almost half of our endowment, as it was then. But what it did, the vote of confidence and the sense of amplitude that we received from that we can do things. Now let's be smart and do the right things, but that we can do them. They weren't just dreams or pie in the sky. We can actually achieve these if we set about it right. And so we made that one gift, and we kept it sequestered within the endowment as a fund. And it served as, with its integrity, as its own in-house endowment. So we would make grants and we would insist on their being matched. It wasn't just a giveaway. And we only did this through the income. So we were not encumbering the principal, except for the Woodruff professorships and scholarships. But anyway, and then as a result of that magnitude, we achieved a level of national recognition, even though we hadn't done much yet, that people thought meant we were actually a school where things were. This was in a time actually when most higher education was deeply constrained by budgets. So in a way, if the pack isn't moving very much, you have one that moves. Even if it doesn't move much, it's moving. And so we got that attention. And as a result, we were able to bring in, many wonderful faculty and leaders and deans and so forth, and do things and make resources available to accomplish things. And that was the transformative time. And I think that made Emory, brought Emory a new kind of self-confidence. We knew we were good, we knew we could be better. But I think with this, there was a thought, we could be great. And as I've said before, it may be that in the total universe of Emory, back in the 70s, the clinic was the one center that had achieved national prominence, and in its applied sense. I longed for the rest of the university to begin to find some comparable position to the clinic in their respective areas. So the clinic, in a way, set the stage, and I'm ever grateful for the clinic. Now it had to play its role. That's where we had a little tension, but it worked out. And I think now I look back on it and think it's just marvelous. And every time I come over here, I'm grateful that the clinic is here and is doing what it's doing and doing it so well.